Hello, everybody. Hi there. Welcome. Hope you're doing well. Finger guns. Pew, 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 pew. Of course, we're not supposed to do that. We learned what happens when weapons that are not loaded end up getting pointed at people, so we need to be careful with the finger guns. And, of course, the prop guns. And, yeah. Hey, Moose. Hey, Shiggy. Hey, Nix. How are things? Hope you all are doing well. I don't know what the devil that was. I'm doing okay today. Honestly, if I'm just being blunt and honest, today was a pretty crappy day. Got some really bad news in multiple fronts, but I'm happy to be streaming because this is at least something that is going to end up being positive. So we'll end the day on a high note. Hey, Figment, good to see you. It's one of those days where life just decided, we'll just take out all the garbage and we'll just do it all at the same time. Yeah. Finger bangs. Oh, yeah. Bad news. No. Yeah. My dad's got some health issues. He's going to have surgery. It's fairly pressing. Won't go into all of it. Some stuff at work. Stuff that I was not expecting to have to do that sort of surprised out of nowhere. It'll all be okay in the long run. It just sort of all hit in this little perfect storm of anxiety. So, I'll be okay. I'm doing better now than I was earlier in the day. Took a walk. Kind of tried to clear my head, Best read in the Darth Vader George Lucas Special Edition? No. No, let's not go there. Also, hey, Akal, good to see you. How are you? Garbage dump day. It happens. Some days are just garbage dump days, right? But I hope you all are doing well. And I am really glad to be here with all of you. Knowing that I got to stream tonight honestly made the day better. I really do appreciate the time that I get to hang out with you all. And I really do appreciate you all coming to hang out with me too. So, so this is Adventures in History, and the show is history, but not in the way that you probably have ever experienced it before, unless you've hung around the stream. We talk about history, but we do so in a fun way. It's very laid back. It's goofy. We tell bad jokes. We, go chase tangents. We end up talking about movies or TV shows or comic books or just whatever pops up, right? I mean, we're just having a good time when we're hanging out, and if we can learn a little bit in the process, even better. Even better. Hey, Depugo, good to see you. How are you today? You thought your day was bad? You just watched M. Night Shyamalan's Old. Okay. So Kyle wins. I don't know. I've never actually seen it. I take it from your joke that it was not one of his better movies. I have not really cared for a Shyamalan movie in a long time. I thought Unbreakable was honestly one of the best superhero movies that's ever been made. I'm not even being sarcastic. I really do think it's that good of a movie. I thought Signs was okay until the very, very end where you got to the twist, and that sort of ruined it for me. I'd still watch it again because there's actually some really good acting in it. I think Lady in the Water is okay. I don't know. The twist being there is no twist, that's sort of like, I don't know. Shyamalan's TV show Servant is great, but I guess he's just the executive producer. I've heard other people talk about Servant being really good. I haven't seen any of it. That came out during the grad school phase of the last 2 years, and anything that has come out in the last 2 years is very hit or miss about whether or not I've experienced it. But I've heard other people say that Servant is pretty good. Didn't that come out was that on Apple TV? Am I correct in that, Depugo? I can't remember. I can't remember exactly where it was. Anyway. Yes, Apple TV. Okay. I did watch the first season of Ted Lasso, which was on Apple TV, and that was quite good. I really like soccer, so and I especially like British Premier League football, which is what they call it over there. But we're in the United States, and if I said football over here, people would be like, football. Old was actually less bad than some of his more recent efforts, but not worth my time. Thank you, Kyle. I will take your word on that. We have fairly compatible tastes in movies, so I will put that one on the list for an insomnia special. All right. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I need something to bore me to sleep. Yeah, so here on Thursday nights, we have a show. It's called Adventures in History. We are on episode 77. 77. Holy crap. That's 76 more than I thought I would ever make. But yeah, and what we do here on Thursday nights is talk about history in chronological order. And at the moment, we are going through history basically by chunks of about 100 years in a break, and we are going through the 4th century right now. So this is the year basically 300 to 399, and you got to remember 4th century, the 1st century is the year 1 to 99, right? So 100s is the 2nd century, 200s is the 3rd century, etc., etc. Closing in on triple digits. I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. We should do something special for episode 100. I just don't know what it would be. But that won't be for like another 6 months or so. Because that would be, we're 23 episodes away. Yeah, so about, what is it now? 10, that would be like April. End of April, beginning of May. Well, I'm going to take some time off during the holiday break. I'll tell you what I'll do. What might be interesting, I might try to schedule episode 100 to coincide with me getting off of work for the end of the semester, and we might have ourselves kind of a blowout. Just sort of some sort of big celebration that it's the end of this year and we've hit 100 episodes. Yeah. I'm going to start trying to retroactively engineer that. Hey, Joey, good to see you. Metran, welcome. Good to see you. History of this stream. What made you start streaming these things? Metran, actually, that is already explained. I did sort of what I called a soft open. I did basically an episode 0 way back when I first started, and sort of explained why I wanted to become a teacher, why I was interested in streaming. So that is saved in the VODs. If you want to go way back to the beginning of the VODs, you could check that out. Tropical Geek is going to bring the booze. Hey, Tropical, how are you? Good to see you. We are set. Shiggy says, what is that? What is a better way to celebrate a blowout than to destroy the Romans? Oh. Which time are we going to destroy the Romans? Are we 476 destroying the Romans, or are we 1453 destroying the Romans? Which Romans are we destroying? All right. Lots of pictures. We could do pictures. So, Figment, I don't know if you were here when we were doing it, but I think it was actually just before you started watching. And it might actually have been what got you to start watching. I did a viewer request that was nothing but pictures. It was about 2 hours of me showing nothing but pictures back to back to back. I showed 100 photos of various places that I have been, and just talked about the locations and what I had done there. I really liked that episode. It's saved in the VODs, a viewer request episode, so you can go back and watch those. And if anybody wanted to, throw that in as a viewer request, I would love to do that. I've got thousands of photographs that I'd love to share. Ultimate Adventure Hat episode. Yeah, that was pretty much just the Adventure Hat. The whole time it was me and the Adventure Hat. I think that was the first stream you joined in. Maybe so. I know that you were in there because I asked you if you would be okay with me showing pictures about you. You've popped some melatonin to actually get some sleep for once, but you're listening to the stream until then. I see you, Metran. And I understand sleep issues, my friend. I went through a really rough time with sleep from about my freshman year of high school until about 3 years after getting out of college, if I'm just being really honest. where I would sleep maybe 3 or 4 hours a night. And I completely understand insomnia and sleep issues. And I sympathize and empathize with you. And I know that can be frustrating. You're saving points to request an early 1980s grease pen transparency overhead projector. That would be great, Schmonite. It's like changing out the transparencies. Just writing everything with my crappy handwriting. That is amazing. I don't even know how I would stream that or where I would get a transparency projector or overhead projector. If I could make that happen, I would totally do that. I would absolutely do that. That is great. I was doing that still in high school. Like I got to high school and we were still doing stuff on the transparencies. I don't even know where you would get transparencies anymore, though. Good gracious. That's your grad school? Oh, okay. Well, you're a few years older than I am. That's okay, though. We love everybody here, right? We're all way more the same than we are different here. So, all right. You sure you have some around? I would bet that my mom probably has some. My mom retired a few years ago after teaching school for 44 years. 44 years she taught grade school. And good gracious, bless her. It's definitely in my blood, though. You can make them fairly easily. Probably so. Probably so. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about tonight. And this is a little bit of an odd stream. Occasionally, if you've hung around the stream for a while, you'll know that there are periods of time in history where there are sort of a proliferation of cultures and civilizations. And these coincide with several big things. Sometimes this happens when there's a bit of a climate shift. Things will get cooler or things will get warmer, and this will either open up or close off land. And because of this, migrant people will move around. I'm sorry, I've got apparently some sort of allergic reaction going on to whatever is outside, but I am itching all over my face. I promise that I'm not on cocaine. I'm just itching. You're usually 3 or 4 hours a night. You're lucky if it's over 6. Sometimes you just don't sleep at all, but doing what you can do to work. Yeah, I understand. I've been there, man. I really, really have. And I said, man, I don't know if you're a man or a lady or neither. Like the guy from Chappelle's show where he's like, y'all got any more of that crack? He's always itching. I've never actually done cocaine, so I don't know if it makes you itch or not. Anyway, so there are periods of time where there are just sort of an explosion of little countries and civilizations and kingdoms. And the 4th century in Asia is very much one of these. And it doesn't have to do necessarily with a climate shift. What it has to do with is a gradual growth of culture and civilization, right? Now, let me make sure that I'm being clear here. There are people groups that have independent physical cultures that exist on every continent of the earth during the 4th century, right? When we're talking about civilizations, what we're talking about are advanced cultures that have centralized governments, that have organized things like labor, military, these sorts of communal efforts where they have defined boundaries and hierarchies of social classes and such. There's a difference between nomadic cultures that are living in small hunter-gatherer groups, not saying that they can't have hierarchies of social order, and, like a big civilization that has big capital cities and such. Are we all buffering or is it just me? It might be everybody. I've dropped a lot of frames. I don't know why I'm dropping frames, but I'm getting drop frame warning. Which I don't know why. I've done literally nothing in different than I did last time I streamed. So, alas. You think that is opium if you did cover... we have not covered the Opium Wars. I'd be happy to do that in a viewer request if somebody brought it up, though. Good now. Try F5. Hey, Vanities, good to see you. It's been a little bit. Are you sure someone from the future didn't just tell them info? Assuming this is a natural event makes it sound like there's not a conspiracy here. Yeah, so what we're looking at in this particular region of Asia is that mostly here in the northern part of what is today China, Romans! Countrymen, lend me your ears.
Come to berry season, not to praise him.
Thank you for that, Host Tropical. Much appreciated. So up here in what is today northern China, Mongolia, and southern Russia, this area had been in proximity with China for, there had been people that organized cultures up there for a couple thousand years at this point. And by the particular time that we're getting to in the 400s, those cultures had been close enough with China that organized big cities and centralized bureaucracies and imperial orders and such are going to start rubbing off on them. And what we're going to see tonight is a whole bunch of new countries sort of pop up right around in here. But we're also going to check in on the other cultures that we have mentioned. We're going to talk about our Southeastern Asian friends, and we're going to go over here and do a little bit of a check-in on Japan. Now, earlier in this phase, which is phase 9, a new phase, we already talked an entire stream about what was going on in Korea because they are really moving up during the 4th century. So last week, we had a whole stream on what's up with Korea. So let us start with a group called the Xianbei. And these are people that we have mentioned before, but as a bit of a refresher or a new introduction, the Xianbei were a group of semi-nomadic horseback cavalry sort of people that are similar to the Mongolian hordes of people like Genghis Khan. A lot of the people that were around at this time looked sort of similar to the way that a Mongol warrior might look. The Xianbei were not directly Mongolian related. Their language was different. Their ethnic groups were different. They were also a little bit closer here to the northern regions of China, and they had a pretty big region that was under what was referred to in history as the Xianbei Empire, but it was actually a little bit more of a confederacy, if we're being honest. There were a lot of really big chieftains and tribes that would act in unison when the central sort of chieftain decided that something needed to happen, but at other times in the year, or even other times during, the years, the individual chieftains might be left to sort of go about their own business as long as they weren't getting in the way of sort of the larger vision, if you will. So if we are talking about the Xianbei, here we are. So this again is in northern China. Here we see Korea. And all of this area right here is the Xianbei. Now, if you're interested, look at all of these different little tribes, right? So we have the Duan, we have the Murong, we'll talk about them just here in a second. The Tuoba, we have the Xiongnu, a group that was really, really important to our discussions on China a few phases ago. If you went back 300 years or so, the Xiongnu were basically as big as the Xianbei. We see other little groups around here, the Dingling, who are going to actually be pretty important to the growth of these groups because we're starting to see the beginning of Turkic tribes. So we have all of these different smaller tribal people that are participating in the larger Xianbei Empire. You heard their horses were stilted. Well, guess what, Shiggy? I actually made a point to go look one of those up. And we may as well go ahead and talk about it because last stream when we mentioned the Xianbei, and I didn't really have a lot of photos in the last stream, I went ahead and pulled an image of a Murong warrior. And we shared this particular image. And people made fun of how chunky the horse was and how small he was and how spindly his legs were. And I felt kind of bad for this ancient horse because I feel like he might have gotten a bad rap. So this is actually a Xianbei archer, and it should be noted that the strength of the Xianbei army was in its light cavalry. These people that were using compound recurve bows with really, really powerful draws that were capable of shooting a really long distance very accurately, and they were really good with them while even galloping over land. You blame the artist? Well, here we go. I knew people were going to bring that up, so what I actually did was I went and found a modern day picture, boom, of somebody in the steppe riding that kind of horse. Now, this is actually two horses. There is a horse behind it. So there's a white horse behind it. So just look here at the foreground. There's your Mongolian style steppe horse. Hey, magnificent. We're body shaming horses now, right? Yes. So these are the type of horses that the Xianbei would have ridden. These aren't technically ponies or donkeys. These are actually horses. They're a particular breed of horse. It's not a fat donkey. This particular person here is a modern day citizen of the country of Mongolia, and I was able to find a news article about the modern Mongolian people who still meet to perform horseback feats, things like throwing spears and riding horses at a gallop and rounding up horses, sort of like a modern day rodeo. How you see people go out and do things like tying up horses or lassoing horses and such. There are still Mongolian people in modern day Mongolia who go out and do stuff like horseback archery still. One small step for horse. Yeah, well, we're big on the song puns for titles, and tonight's title is One Step Closer. Which is actually a little bit of a double pun because the next line is I'm about to break, if you know the song by Linkin Park. And what ends up happening in a lot of these areas is that these regions start breaking away. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so we need to sort of back up and cover things in order. So, what's going on with the Xianbei? Well, here's the deal. They had become fairly symbiotic with the central government in China. There was a system called Heqin where the younger noble daughters of either the imperial family, not in the direct line of ascent, or some of the other higher noble families would intermarry with the Xianbei leadership, and the Xianbei had actually acted in a couple of instances sort of as the mobile archer units of the Imperial Chinese Army. And in China during this period of time, they are relying really, really heavily on the Xianbei. Step back. You never knew your real horse, but you have a great relationship with your steppe horse. How fast is the fat donkey for the purpose of war? The fat donkey can run a lot faster than a human can, and that's really what matters. Yes, exactly. Faster than you can run. Which is fast enough for a guy with a bow and some arrows. Correct, Figment. Correct. So the Xianbei had benefited from being very close to the central authority in China, and things in China are going bad in the 4th century. Stop horsing around. We'll have no more horseplay here. Thanks very much. Make me round you all up. Anyway, the Jin dynasty is the ruling dynasty in China at this point, and they were basically falling apart. Now, we'll talk more about the Jin dynasty next week if you want to come back around. They look so amusing. Oh, you all. See, this is why I love being here. I can totally appreciate the puns and such. Of course you wouldn't. So, Jin dynasty is falling apart, and luckily the Xianbei at this point in China's history are pretty friendly. And some of the larger Xianbei tribes, especially the Murong, are going to basically be co-opted into the Chinese military and government structure because China's central authority is starting to crumble. And as long as they have these sort of Xianbei vassals, they're willing to allow them a little bit more gravity because they need reliable rulers. They need somebody to be the governor of all these northern provinces. And a lot of these Xianbei tribes actually end up becoming Sinized, which is basically like they become like the Chinese. They start adopting a lot of the Chinese culture. They start living purely in cities. They're going to start dressing Chinese, and to a certain extent, they're going to give up even some of their larger archer type histories. I'm actually going to a rodeo in a couple of weeks, getting warmed up on your horse humor. Well, here we go, Meg. I'm glad that you got to come by because there are going to be lots of goofy horse puns tonight. You might hoof it down and poof and blow it. Hoof and poof, blow a house down. Sounds like a nightmare. Oh man. Okay. So while some of these big tribes, like the Murong, the Duong, that I mentioned earlier, the Tuoba, while these people are becoming sort of Chinese proxy governors, there are going to be other Xianbei that are going to decide to sort of go off on their own. And one of them, if I can get over here to my notes, is a group called the Tu Yuhun, who are going to basically decide, well, you know, we're right here on the border between China and the larger Xianbei Confederacy. We're going to kind of go off and make our own thing. This is founded by one of the sort of off-splinters of the Murong dynasty, a guy named Murong Tuyuhun. And it's going to be based around northern Tibet, the southern part of the steppe, right? And importantly, the region that this guy takes over is going to be sort of the backbone of some of the Silk Road. Because one of the things that was problematic in the Jin dynasty was that they did not have enough troops to patrol the trade routes along the Silk Road. Let me point to this region specifically. We're mostly talking about this region right in here. This sort of craggy area that a lot of people might not think is necessarily good for trade, but is absolutely essential to trade. This was the place where trade got hijacked. If we look at this just geographically speaking, you can tell there are going to be roads through here, but they're going to be narrow. They're going to have lots of places for bandits to hide. It's going to be really easy for people to sort of swoop in, pick off traders, and then run away. So when Murong Tuyuhun moves into this area, he basically is able to take over because he brings stability to the trade. And people are willing to trade a little bit of their tax money in support of keeping the larger portion of their trade. Now, this is not really this is frowned upon. The Jin do not care for this very much at all, but the important part here is that the Jin dynasty in China was not strong enough to stop them from doing so, because the authority of the Jin dynasty over here could no longer project its power up in this direction. So it was sort of there for the taking, and the Tuyuhun are going to basically hold on to that. Yes, that's very much an ambush zone. Well, now the jokes are whinnying all over. We're going off to Yehud. Is it fair to say that at this time Mongolia is a buffer zone for China, or is that too much of a simplification? Maybe the good relations had legitimate reasons. So if we throw up the modern borders, if we just, if we're looking at where modern day Mongolia is, let me, actually I've got a bigger map here, and we can, let me throw up this map here and I'll talk about that question. All right, so here we go. This is a little bit fast forwarded, and this is at the end of our discussion tonight. We're going to talk about a lot of these people sort of in brief. But here's our Tuyuhun group, and if you'll note, actually this group right here called the Shiyu, this is sort of, I didn't actually plan on talking about them, but I can ramble about them a little bit. The Shiyu are really just a conglomeration of city-states that are here in the Tarim Basin. that are trade states. But there is no real Mongolia at this point because at this particular portion in history, there aren't really Mongols. The people that go on to become the Mongols are related to some of these people, especially a group called the Donghu, who are going to be part of the group that go on to form this thing up here called the Rouran Khaganate. I don't really like this particular reference here, the Huan. That's in reference to the fact that China called these people worms, but that's a whole other story that we'll cover here in just a second. Yeah, so look at all these different groups. We've got the Northern Liang, the Later Liang, the South Liang, the Qin, the Northern Wei, the Later Yan, the Southern Yan, the Buyeo. This all right here, so like all of these states used to be part of the Jin dynasty. And what's going to happen is that if we... Oops, sorry, I'm zoomed in. Let me go back to... If we look at our Xianbei Empire, what's going to happen basically is that the larger Xianbei Confederacy is going just to decide to settle down. And when they do that, they realize that the empire of the Jin is not capable of keeping them from taking this territory of their own. So all of these little kingdoms are basically going to be the Xianbei. They just sort of settle down. They start living in cities. They start adopting central bureaucracies. And they really start looking a lot like China. And this is, again, the Sinicizing movement that is happening because the culture of China was sort of like a gravity well. And the Xianbei had become trapped in it. They're getting sucked towards sedentary life instead of nomadic life. So many provinces. Yeah, what's crazy is being able to ramble on all of this stuff and tell you what's going on and who these leaders are and where they all came from. That's where it gets really tricky. And I'm not saying that I could do that very accurately, but I could tell you a little bit about all of them. Anyway, so what's really going to be a turning point and make a lot of this stuff happen is a big war called the War of Five Barbarians. Is that going to fit? Of course it's not going to fit. We'll shrink it down a little bit. The War of Five Barbarians. This takes place from 304 to 316, right? So we're in the 4th century, 304 to 316. And this starts as a civil war inside of the Jin dynasty. A lot of the vassals of the Jin dynasty decide to break away. And for a little while, at the beginning of the war, the Xianbei are actually going to fight with the Chinese. So you have the Xianbei, you have a string of sort of unaligned vassals that are in rebellion, and then you have the larger Jin Empire. So it's like a sandwich. But then the Xianbei realize the Jin are basically not going to be able to pull this one out. And when they realize that it is possible at this point for them to basically break off chunks of China and make it their own, that's where all those little states come from. That's where the Western Yan, the Later Yan, the Qin, the Southern Liang, the Northern Wei, all these different kingdoms start popping up because the Xianbei decide we're just going to take China, we're going to rule it like we would rule it, and the Jin dynasty is not going to be able to stop us. So what does this actually mean for the Xianbei? What is this functionally going to do to their culture? Well, again, they start looking like China, but there's going to be some internal struggle here because the problem that you face when you have this big shift that happens rapidly is, as always, the really staunch conservatives versus the people who have long-term visions. Because inside of the Xianbei leadership position, there were a lot of people that were like, why do we change things? Why do we need to settle down? Why do we need to go live in cities? Why do we need to give up semi-nomadism? And some people were like, do you see how much money can be made? And so you have this sort of generational gap and you have this sort of traditional gap inside of the Xianbei. And unfortunately, instead of breaking off all these little chunks and then sort of keeping their closer confederated idea, they basically start falling into fighting against each other. So the Xianbei, as we know them, as this big centralized empire that can line up when they need to, is going to basically fall by the wayside. Because when they start sinicizing. They're really going to be interested in drawing these firm boundaries. Like, this is my territory. I collect tax money from these people. I have legal jurisdiction over this area. So it's not just we go live in cities. It's a complete different mindset for the Xianbei. And this is going to be a pretty big shift for them. Their leaders are going to go from basically war chiefs who are capable of beating up everybody else in the clan to dynastic emperors, right? And this is going to turn into something a little bit later, a couple of phases down the road. We're going to talk about the northern and southern dynasties of China. And the northern dynasties are going to be basically the descendants of these Xianbei kingdoms, who are usually sort of led by a crust of the Xianbei, but the majority of the people in these territories are Chinese people. So, of course, there's going to be a lot more intermarriage. They're going to start not being so different ethnically, linguistically, religiously, culturally. So this is a big period of change for the Xianbei. And it's going to lead to other changes down the road, right? But we can't talk about them for the entire night. I mean, we could, but we'd start getting into like the 400 level history discussions instead of sort of like the surface level discussions. So I mentioned, and I showed a picture of where am I typing? Here we are. The Rouran Cognate. So who were they? Well, if we go back to... oh, fudge. I had this map here, which basically showed how it all broke down. Okay, so here's another map of all of these little 5 barbarian states. So here's our Tuyahun and our Qin and Northern Wei. This is actually one of the big important ones right here. The Northern Wei and the Liang and the Northern Liang, Southern Liang, and later Yan. These guys over here end up fighting against the Goguryeo kingdom of Korea, and the Goguryeo end up beating these guys up pretty badly. So, interesting stuff. Here we are. So, Rouran Cognate. Now, this looks a lot like our Xianbei, but it's going to change, and they're going to end up moving over this way. So, who were these people? Well, okay, first off, we don't really know. And let me explain. There are a lot of different ideas about who exactly were in the Rouran. And if you start doing a lot of digging into the texts, the primary sources from this area, from this era in history, you're going to find some people that say, oh, they're just Xianbei. They're one of these Xianbei groups that go off and do their thing when everybody else is going off and do their thing. And that seems to be possible. Some people go, no. Here's what happened. Some of the Xianbei merged with this other group called the Donghu, and they made a new people called the Rouran. And there's maybe some evidence of that. Some people go, no. What happened was the Xianbei got really, really strong, and what was left of the Xiongnu decided we got to get out of here, and they're the ones that left and went over to join with the Donghu and formed the Rouran. Now, I know that these are all these weird people groups, and there's all these weird names kind of flying around, and it's this person and that person, blah, blah, blah. If you're going to come away with something, come away with this. We're not really sure exactly who they were. There has been some genetic marker tests done, and the ones that we can conclusively show are definitely from the leadership of the Rouran, show a mixed ancestry of several different people groups, including people like the Xianbei, the Donghu, and somewhat of the Xiongnu. So it might be that they were sort of a conglomeration of people groups, and it actually kind of makes sense with their origin story. So let me tell you their origin story. There was a guy, and he was... Where am I typing here? I always do this. I always lose my... This is too many windows open. And I can't spell and type at the same time. I'm going to have to put this on 2 lines, aren't I? This guy's name was Ujiulu Muglu. So there's a great name for you. Ujiulu Mugalu. Pretty epic, right? Imagine naming your firstborn that. Looking down at your little son and go, I will name him Ujiulu Mugalu. Anyway, so this person was apparently, according to the stories, some form... I'm sure they didn't have time to leave written records because they were too busy murdering people from horseback. Maybe. Maybe. It could have been the murder. It could have also been that they didn't have a written language. His nickname was Lulu. It was. Ujiulu Mugalu. Ujiulu, by the way, is his clan name. Mugalu is his given name. So we'll call him Mugalu. Mugalu was, according to the stories, either an escaped slave or a prisoner that had escaped. And according to the stories, he and some other people that he helped escape, potentially slaves, potentially other prisoners, some also say that he was sort of exiled and it was like a political prisoner sort of thing. I shall name him Minimi. Anyway, Mugalu ends up going out away from the other people and moving over into this sort of region right around in here where there were people living, but they were not really what we would consider very organized. They were sort of disassociated. These are very, very nomadic people that live in this area. They would have been sort of tangentially related to the larger cities down in this area, but the people up here are pretty rural, right? Sounds like they had a lot in common with Prince Humperdinck. In that they wanted to marry Buttercup. Maybe. Now I want to just quote Princess Bride for the rest of the stream, but we don't have to, unless you all really want to. Or maybe we don't. I don't know. I'm just trying to be entertaining here. I know that this is not everybody's cup of tea. This is my cup of tea. I'm actually drinking chai tea, which is Asian tea, in a sort of simpatico movement here. Kill someone. Ujiulu 2, Electric Mugalu. Oh, that's good. Kill someone, frame some us from it. They're booked. All right, so here we go. Mugalu, he escapes, he moves out to this area, and he starts putting together this really interesting, according to the story, he wants to put together a nomadic group of peaceful horseback nomads that can sort of roam around and help each other out. He's got all of these great virtuous ideas. What's really interesting is that the Chinese sources that talk about this guy really hate this dude. They really have a lot of negative things to say about Mugalu. They're the ones, by the way, that started the whole idea that he was an escaped slave. Because China sort of has this trope where if they don't like you and you're not Chinese, they just say, oh, this person was a slave. And, you know, they're trying to attach all of the stigma of slavery to Mugalu, and he's an escaped slave, so he's not even an obedient slave, which is even worse if you're a Confucius, like many people in China were, you know. So he's not even a good slave. He's a Confucius, or he's a bad slave, so he's just a horrible person. And there were sort of nicknames for the Rouran Khaganate. One of them came from Chinese. It was a transliteration and a little bit of a kind of vocal pun on their name, where they were called wriggling worms, which is a pretty bad thing to call people, you know, if you're in the ancient world. Calling somebody a worm is a pretty low insult, right? You Hate the Princess Bride is Ted Cruz's favorite movie for making me think that there might be a sliver of human left in him somewhere. Aww. Ted Cruz is a human, and just like all of us, he has the capacity and the agency with him to choose right and wrong. And it's his choice about whether or not he wants to be right or wrong and choose right or wrong. So if we don't agree with his choices, which goodness knows I don't many times, there are some things I agree with him on, and a lot of things that I don't. He thinks that his beard looks nice. I think it kind of makes him look more like the Zodiac Killer, which I know is a joke, but, if you're going to be accused of being a murderer, maybe not get the weird hobo beard. I don't know. It's just a hint. Ted, if you're listening, we could probably sit down and find things to be nice and talk about, but, dude, the beard's not working for you. I'm sorry. If it makes you feel better, Ted Cruz roots for Humperdinck in the film. Oh, that's that's great. That's great. Okay, so anyway, Moogaloo goes off with his band of merry men and ruffians, and he starts the Ruron Cognate, and they're supposedly peaceful, and they try to patrol the region and make sure that no bad guys are going around. Here's the thing, though. We really don't know if this guy is a real person or not. If he was, we don't know if any of the stories that we have about him are accurate. But we don't know, like, when he was born. Some people say that he was born in, like, the late 270s. Some people say that he was born, like, right at the turn of the century. Who knows? We really don't have a lot of stuff about him. We don't have him mentioned in any concrete sources that give us really firm data. And we don't have a tomb for him, right? So if this guy was real, which I sort of think that there's enough evidence to say that he was real, it's probably safe to say we don't know a lot about him. We know more about his son, who is Yujiulu Chinluhui. And, I'm sure everybody wants to practice saying his name. Chinluhui is his son. Now, this guy we do have some more firm data on. We know that he was ruling the Ruron Cognate somewhere in the middle 300s. Probably starts ruling maybe in the 330s or so, and is ruling probably up until the 350s. He is going to take over from his father, which is why I think that there's enough evidence to say that Moogaloo was probably a real person. And he is going to add more territory to the Ruron Horde zone. So if we get back over here to our other image that I was showing you, we can see that the Ruron Cognate has expanded a lot, because this guy is just basically riding hither and yon, adding territory that he can, and accomplishing things like, bringing peace between warring Xianbei tribes, bringing everybody in together. You'll never complain about your name ever again. There's nothing wrong with your name. It's probably hard for people to spell because they're not used to seeing Italian or Southern European names. I can't remember exactly what your last name is. I know what your last name is, but I can't remember the origin of your last name, Stacy. Oh, crap. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have even said that. I should shut up now. Anyway, southern France, Italy, or Sicily, or somewhere in there is what I would guess. Yep, my bad. I'm an idiot. Portuguese. Wow, would not have guessed that. I guess I would. It's got U's in it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. I feel really bad about that now. I'm going to hide behind my thing and just show you a map. Anyway. Okie doke. Okay. So, boom. There's the Ruron. They're interesting to talk about. Pretty cool people. Let us move over to our friends in Japan. You're fine with them now? Okay. Yeah, the Juan. That's the Chinese sort of play on their name that basically is where the Chinese are insulting them, calling them worms, which is why I don't necessarily care for that particular name very much. And it's not Juan, it's Juan. But anyway, so what's going on in Japan? Well, it's kind of hard to say what's going on in Japan during the 400s. Um, there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. Most notably, we really don't know very much about, oh gosh, basically anything. We know some of the emperors. We know that there were some things moving around the scene, but Japan didn't have written language at that point. Japan was mostly being described by other sources. So when we learn about Japan in the 4th century, this is going to be from the perspective of other sources, most notably Korean sources and Chinese sources. And as you might expect, neither the Koreans nor the Chinese are particularly friendly about what's going on in Japan. So we do have archaeological evidence that we can fall back on, and that tells us some things. And we can be certain about a few things, and we'll talk about what we can be certain about. First off, we know that the guy that was basically in charge for effectively this entire century, which we'll talk about this in just a bit, is a guy, good gravy, where are all of my windows going? Is a guy named Nintoku. He is Emperor Nintoku. And he looks like this. This is an image of Emperor Nintoku. You can see him here in his fancy dress. This is clearly an artistic rendering. This was not from the actual time. This is a sort of a historical interpretation that comes from significantly later in Japanese history. But this is the oldest picture of him that I can locate, even though it's about 1,000 years after he died, just to be fair. It's hard to find pictures of rulers from this time period in this region. I don't really know why. I can make a couple of guesses. The biggest guess that I would like to say is that the internet is sort of biased to Western history, and a lot of Eastern history sort of gets looked over and not linked the right way. So while there might be images of these people out there, it's not indexed the right way for Google to pick it up. And if it's not indexed the right way for Google to pick it up, guess what? Nobody goes to look at it. So anyway, here's Nintoku. So this guy supposedly rules from 313 to 399. And if you start doing math, you realize that's like 76 years. And he didn't take over as a baby. So did he live to like 110? I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible, but is it likely? Probably not. So this is what happens when we rely on Japanese sources. That's only like a few minutes, right? You know, it's like just an hour or so. So we do have Japanese sources. And the Japanese did write stories of themselves and histories of themselves. And one of them is called the Nihon Shoki. And this is the one that sort of gives his years of rule. Here's the deal, though. The Nihon Shoki was written about 500 years after this guy would have ruled. And it's really unreliable when it comes to dates. It gives these really ridiculously long rules for a lot of these early emperors. This is during the period of time where the emperor was not too far disassociated from the actual deity that was the first Japanese emperor. So the Japanese imperial line is supposedly related back to an actual god who ruled over the first Japanese dynasty. So, you know, they're closer to God, so they live longer and they're more prosperous, etc., etc. This is a fairly common trope in early histories where, you know, if you look at lists of kings, the kings' reigns are forever long. This is true in Assyria. If you look at the Assyrian kings list, some of the early rulers are expected, you know, to rule for 100 plus years. This is also true of people even like the early Israelites. If you look at the Jewish scripture, or if you would prefer to call it the Old Testament, if you're looking at a Christian Bible, And you look at some of these old generations and these lists of people, you have people that are living 600 years and living 900 years and such. This is just a trope that a long time ago people lived longer. So it's the Old Testament. It's like the Old Testament, more or less. The Nihon Shoki does become more grounded in history the closer it gets from the events that happened to the writing of the Nihon Shoki. And by about the middle 400s in Japan, so about, I think it's like 461 or 462, somewhere in there, we actually get extra Japanese sources that line up with Japan's sources. So you have the Nihon Shoki that say this person ruled from this year to that year. And then we have sources from China that say, yes, we were conducting negotiations with this guy around the same time. So when you have 2 points of chronological data, you can cross-reference them and you can get more definite on when things are going on. You do the Nihon Shoki and you turn yourself around. So mixing religion and history is like mixing cooked and raw meat. I don't know if I like that metaphor. It might be mixing the metaphor a bit too much. So religion and history are the same thing for a lot of people. And if you look far enough back, most history is religious in nature, especially if you're looking at ancient history. Because if you're looking at the foundation of dynasties or the foundation of kingdoms or empires or such, you end up with this scenario where everybody wants to be tied to the gods. So if you look at Rome, right? There's one version where Romulus and Remus are the sons of this guy named Aeneas, who was in the Trojan War and blessed by the gods, right? So he was this great, mighty, God-blessed warrior. You know, there's that whole she-wolf episode where they were, you know, raised by a wolf in the middle of the woods, and because they were destined for these great things from the gods, they survived. This is not necessarily even totally untrue of, like, even if you look at the founders of America, right? We have all of these sort of folk myths about people, like Abraham Lincoln couldn't tell a lie, and George Washington threw a silver dollar across the Potomac. You know, that sort of stuff is the same impetus behind saying, like, our country is founded by a god, right? frames. I don't know. I don't know. Oh, are we dropping frames again? Yeah, the little red. I don't know what the devil is going on with my internet connection tonight. It's just being a jerk, and it's dropping frames like crazy. I don't know. Sorry, ladies and gents and everybody. I wish I could tell you. Wish I could tell you. All right, so what's up? So Nihon, Nihon is the Japanese name for their own country, so they call themselves Nihon. Nintoku is probably going to exist, but probably not for that long. He's probably a real ruler. We know that based on the Japanese history and from what we can tell of archaeology, what was happening during this period of time is that the emperor was becoming more organized. And there's going to be a movement towards centralized power, because we know that there are going to be public works that start showing up. And when we see public works, here we're talking about things like canals or dams or walls around cities. These are things that require a lot of work hours, a lot of effort to put together, and that doesn't work without a strong central authority. You don't get these big public works unless there is somebody sort of making it happen or forcing it to happen, right? So this is most likely Nintoku, who is the emperor at the time, sort of making all this work. One of the things that happens at this time, this is still during the Kofun period of Japan. Kofun period is spelled like this, and it is referred to as the Kofun period because of the big tombs that were being built, and they're all sort of shaped like a keyhole. And the Kofun attributed to Nintoku is the largest one. And it is this guy. It is referred to as the Daisen Kofun, or sometimes you might see it referred to as the Daisen Ryo Kofun. This is in the modern day city of Osaka, and this is absolutely enormous. The moat is original to the design. It was built naturally, and it has been maintained by the Japanese government. The Japanese government is very, very, very protective of the Kofun. All of the Kofun, not just the Daisen Kofun here. It is hard to get out here. You basically have to be a Japanese archaeologist to have been out there, and it is impossible to basically do excavation work. They will not let you do excavation stuff. Figment, if you've been to Daisen Ryu, I am sad because I am now even more jealous of you. You are not happy to have to stand and stare across the moat at it. Yeah, there's a little platform right here where you sort of go out and look across. But this thing is enormous. Yeah, you wanted to go on it, but it's not allowed. Correct. I wonder what the shape represents. Imagine in a lock and a key, it was much later. Yes, vanities, that is correct. So if we were to look at this sort of as a two-part structure, so the tomb part is here, and it would have been circular, and inside of this circle, there would have been multiple chambers. And this part here, sort of the front trapezoid shape here, was actually sort of designed to draw your eye in. So this is a bit of like a triangular shape right here that goes up a rise, and then there's a line across the top of it to where you get to the mound here. If we were to, let me actually see if I can, ooh, crud, wrong window. Let me see if I can maybe get us a side view. Let's zoom in. Let's zoom in. Yes, I'm sorry. Let me see. We'll just put it here. Daisen Kofun. It's in Osaka. Okay, here we go. Maybe this is going to get us there. Yes, here we are. All right, now let me see if I can put us on a street level where we can see it. Is it actually going to show it to me? Yeah, you just get like the... Is that as far as I can go? Yeah, I was hoping it would give us some three-dimensionality to it. Oh, ooh, here we go. We can get some. All right. Yeah, there's some good 3D for you. All right, so yeah, we can even see Mausoleum of Emperor Nintoku. So this region right here would have basically been designed as kind of an eye draw entryway. And you would have walked up a path to get to right about here, and then there was a ridge. You can even see like the ridge that runs right here. And then this mound itself was of a higher elevation than any of this. So the path would have met the mound at about 3/4 of the way up the mound. And then there would have been a platform where you would have done offerings to the gods and to the emperor. And then you would have been able to go down into it if you were of a particular family or maybe a priest or something, into the rooms that were inside of the mound here. But yeah, all of this right here, the front part, is basically just spectacle to pull your eye up to where there would have been a platform right here where the front entryway met the big dome of the mound. Hey, JMR. Just bring your diplomatic immunity swimming trunks. You better, because if you decide that you're going to go after this, you're not going to get out. They're going to put you in jail. JMR, this is in Osaka, Japan, and it's so we have Asia, the Japan. This is the tomb of Emperor Nintoku, and then below that we have what it's actually called. It's the Daisen Kofun, and it's in Osaka, Japan. And we're just sort of looking at how big it is. This thing is enormous. Let me see if I can get we can use our handy dandy ruler tool and get a measurement on this. Well, let me do meters. 481 meters long for our imperial friends. For us in the United States, that's 526 yards long. So it's really, really big. Really, really big. And it would not have happened if there were not centralized, organized labor. And we know that there were organized labor because we see things like this, right? This was something that would have taken hundreds, if not thousands of people, hundreds, if not thousands of hours to build. This is absolutely enormous. It's no, you can't actually go onto the mound itself. You can go to the location and you can walk up on a platform and you can look at it across the water. Anything but the metric system. Rather selfish of them to take up so much room in a major city with their tomb. Well, you have to remember that this was way before Osaka was as big as it is today. Yeah. So this is the sort of stuff that's going on in Japan. Now, what else can I tell you about what's going on in Japan? Not very much else. Not very much else. A few things that we know are happening because of archaeological records. We know that the native Japanese religion Shinto is starting to crystallize. It had mythological formation going way, way back hundreds of years before this. But during this period of time, it is starting to become a little bit more organized and formal. We start seeing more references, visually speaking, to religious events. We start seeing particular depictions of spirits or gods and goddesses show up a little bit more. So the religion is getting organized. And this is not really as a surprise because when you have an organization of politics, organization of religion very frequently either is paired with that or comes as a result of that. So, good stuff. Yes, we'll all go there. We'll go there and buy all of the Gundams, and then we'll ship them back to us, and we'll pay cheap prices over there for them, and then make it up in shipping to send it back to America. You can stare at the trees and the moat. You don't ever apologize for mentioning Gundams. Don't ever apologize. I'm right there with you. One of the friends here in the chat, Mac in a lab coat, one of the mods in the chat, has been to Japan twice and has sent me pictures from inside of the official Bandai Gundam store. And it just sort of like, it breaks my heart because I want to go and I want to buy all of the models. I don't have the money to buy all of the models. I don't really have the money to get to Japan, but, I want to go. So, and it would definitely be, it would be a Gundam experience for sure. For sure. So don't ever apologize for bringing up the Gundams. What else can we say? Well, we've got a centralization of authority. We've got some motion towards centralization of religion. But we do know that there is some sort of conflict going on between Japan and Korea. So the Korean Peninsula and Japan. There are three big kingdoms on the peninsula of Korea. We have the Goguryeo, the Baekje, and the Shilla. And if you read Korean history, you will know that according to the Korean history, the Koreans actually went and colonized Japan. And if you look at certain Korean textbooks, the maps that they show in Korean textbooks, you'll see that they claim part of the islands here, especially parts of the southern island of Kyushu, and then along the northern boundary of the island of Honshu. You'll see, oh yes, this was clearly within the Baekje domain, and this was in the Shilla domain. There's not a lot of archaeological evidence to back that up. We know for a fact that there was trade going on because we see a lot of back and forth. We see items showing up in both. Denden Town in Osaka has a used figure store, which is like 90% discount for everything. Oh, I'm jealous. You didn't realize Gundams were around in this era. I'm really glad you tuned into this stream. Right, so every country only had one Gundam, though. That's the problem. And they had limited amount of supply to run it, so they didn't use them all the time. But every 10 years or so, they had a big competition where each country sent its Gundam in to fight to see who was going to be the head of the global council. And if you're familiar with Gundam, you'll know that I literally just described the plot of G Gundam. How long is that stretch of water between Japan and Korea? The strait right here? I don't know. Let's see. Let's do miles. About 140 miles. So not too far. There were ships back and forth quite a bit. I think the boat from Busan to Japan was supposed to be about 4 hours. That sounds about right. I can point you to a Gundam stream of someone. Tropical Geek, I actually build Gundam models on stream sometimes, usually on the weekend. JMR here, I should shout out JMR. If you are not already following JMR, you should absolutely go follow JMR Killer, who is a game streamer and has started building Gundams and models on stream. Really great person. I've always had fun when I've hung around in the stream, and you should too. So you should go follow them out. But yeah, I follow a lot of people that do Gundam stream. But if you're welcome to share whomever it is. It might not be somebody that I know, and we can always share the love, right? Absolutely. Yeah, it's like a really quick flight in a Cessna. Just bloop. Just hop in the plane. Moose would walk 500 miles, and I would walk 500 more, you know? Just saying. We can all pretend, right? Right? So what's actually going on between the Koreans and the Japanese, we really don't know the full extent of this. There are some sources later on in Japan that admit that there is Korean lineage in some of these provinces in Japan at that time. If we do genetic research on some of these people, we find that they do occasionally have Korean genetic markers. But does that mean that the Koreans controlled part of the islands? We really can't say that. That it's almost certainly going to be some, what I like to call sort of malicious archaeology, where you claim that everything is yours. And it's fair to say that when the Japanese conquered Korea, they started digging up a whole bunch of stuff and saying, look, we used to rule you all. This is a legitimate reason that we're back to rule you now. Between Korea and Japan and China, there is a lot of cultural baggage. Just so much cultural baggage that goes way back thousands and thousands of years, which is why their relationships today are so crazy. His name is Foolish Dragon, and he's from the Netherlands. Oh, nice. He does Gundam and Lego on Mondays. Let me see if I can... Will it work? Hey, there we go. Foolish Dragon. Gundam and Lego streamer. Go give him a follow. Shane raising the stakes. He says he will walk 1,000 miles. Going, what's going on? Yeah, so what do we know about Japan? It was centralizing. Things are getting bigger. Other than that, we're not really sure. We don't have a lot of written records that talk about them. The ones that we do have are incredibly biased. We can't necessarily trust them, so there we go. All right. So let me, have I showed all my pictures? Yeah. Let's move around a little bit, and we'll check in with our friends down here in Southeast Asia. So if you were with us last phase, in phase 8, you'll know that we spent a stream talking about a couple of different kingdoms down here in Southeastern Asia. And them getting themselves established and such. And we're going to check in on 2 of them, 2 that have had pretty good goes of things during the 4th century. One of them is the Funan. Let me change all my notes here. Gotta do that. Funan. Boom. Magical. You assumed a mutual enemy of North Korea and China would make South Korea and Japan today bury the hatchet. You would think so. That is absolutely not the case. There is a lot of animosity between South Korea and Japan, especially dealing with the treatment of South Korean prisoners of war, women, and just general population from about 1904 through the end of World War II when Japan controlled Korea. They were not nice to the Koreans. They enslaved them in many instances. And there's a lot of hate between those two groups. Nowadays, they are in a bit of economic contention, so it's still awkward, a lot better than their relationship with China, of course, but there's also a lot of racism against South Korea. Correct. If they did, it would be a very temporary truce and alliance. Yeah, it would be basically out of necessity. You know, China's actually doing something really, really bad, and if we don't team up, China's going to get away with it. Humans are so inhuman. It's crazy, right? It's crazy how inhuman we can be. It really is. All right, so who are the Funan? All right, so your Funan are a group of people that are establishing a kingdom down here in Southeastern Asia. Here's a map. Bum, bada, bum. We can see here their capital, AiH, which is at this time becoming a pretty big city. We do know of these people down here from substantial amounts of contact between them and China. At certain points in the 4th century, it appears, and we're not 100% certain about this because it's mostly in Chinese records and they lie, it appears that the Funan might have been a vassal of the Jin dynasty. It's also quite possible that what is happening here is that the Funan were sending gifts and ambassadors to China, and then the Chinese were just saying, oh, you're not Chinese, you're lesser than us, you're our vassal. It's always safe to assume that China does not actually have as much control over non-Chinese people as they say that they do. It's always fair to say that in history because the Chinese sources always pretend that China has domination over everybody else that it mentions. The idea that China pretends that it's stronger than it is not something that's new. That goes way back in their history. All right. So here we have the Funan. What do we know about them? Well, during this particular 4th century, we still don't know too terribly much about them. They're not writing their own sources. Everything that we know about them is coming out of China and archaeological stuff. We know that there seems to have been a ruling dynasty, but we don't really know many of the names. In fact, the only ruler from this period of time that we know for certain is a guy named Kanada, who appears in Chinese sources because he sent some elephants up to the Chinese emperor as a gift. That was in, I believe, the year 357. And we really don't know too much else about what's going on in the Funan other than they are growing and they are trading. If we look at the map here, if we roll backwards in history before the Funan started, right about here, there was a road that basically split this peninsula. This is the Malay Peninsula where we have Malaysia. And there was a road that ran right through here that basically allowed ships to sail from India and dock here, and then your goods to be offloaded and ported across this peninsula and put back on a ship and floated around here. But the Funan kingdom during this period of time is going to recognize that it's a very difficult thing to do, and they're actually going to start trading more around. So when we look back at our image of the Funan kingdom, you can see that they're holding this because of the sort of the portage way across here, but they're moving south because they're going to want to start actually sailing. Because they're going to want to sail around here. And this is mostly going to be in an attempt to connect India to China by water. And the Indian subcontinent was unifying during this period of time. We'll talk about the Gupta dynasty and empire in a stream a couple of weeks from now. But even though the Jin dynasty was falling apart, there's still quite a bit of trade going out of it, especially out of the southern part. So if you can connect India to China by sea instead of by land, this is something that the Funan would love to do. So they're expanding a little bit. We don't know too much about what else is going on, but we do know that India is still the biggest influence. And we can start seeing a lot more instances of Hinduism and Buddhism during this time in Southeastern Asia, which is both a product of India. So I know I haven't shown a lot of interesting pictures tonight. So since the Funan are basically the old progenitors of a lot of Southeastern Asian countries, including Cambodia and Thailand, I decided I would show you some good curry. Woo! This also serves as a lesson. Thai red curry is a thing because guess what? That's coming out of India. Curry's kind of an Indian thing, but here we have some good red curry. I love me some red curry. Some of my favorite Thai food is red curry. I love especially aubergine, eggplant, whatever you want to call them. I guess aubergine is what you call them if you're using the metric system. Right? Anyway, so while this is just a placeholder image, I did actually think about what I would show here. And the fact that this is a Thai dish with Indian spice is because the Funan were really closely tied to India. And there's still a lot of... So if you remember me mentioning that the Xianbei were sort of stuck in the Chinese gravity well. Southeastern Asia, including our groups like the Chinla and the Funan and the Pew city-states that we'll talk about here in just a second, they're sort of stuck in the Indian gravity well. So the Indian subcontinent is the center of the culture that is radiating out from India, just like China was radiating up into the Xianbei territory. So it's the same principle that's happening here, just in a different region, right? Everyone is always trying to connect with India. Why not Australia? I don't know if anybody in Southeast Asia would have known that Australia was there at that point. I would suspect that they kind of had a general idea of what Australia was, but considering that the population bases in Australia that are really populated areas would have been sort of down here and along the far coastline. I mean, there's a little bit of stuff up here in the north, right? But if you're coming out of the Malay Peninsula and coming right down here, you're basically going to run into, the outback. And the level of organized civilization inside of Australia at that time was still very, very low, right? There's still the Aboriginal peoples that are living there that are very much hunter-gatherers and not particularly organized, right? Did Australia have a civilization? Let me be very careful here when I describe this. So when we use the word civilization, what we typically mean is an organized society that has written language, that has records, that has written rules and centralized organization, right? Australia, in a native culture, never got that far. They had lots of different cultures who are referred to as Aboriginal people in general, but they all had individual names, right? They're sort of a tribal system that was similar to people that live in sub-Saharan Africa or people that lived in North America prior to the Europeans showing up. So they were not a unified central culture of one people. They were a lot of different tribes of people that were all sort of ethnically related if you look at the genetics far enough back in time. But they had multiple different regional languages. They had multiple different physical cultures. They had different lifestyles. Some of them were fully nomadic. Some of them were semi-nomadic. Yeah. So, and the Maori are usually over here and also on some of these islands that sort of spread out in the archipelago right here and then over here in New Zealand as well. So there were tribes of people living there, but they were not organized into very complicated civilizations. They were still smaller, semi-nomadic. Some of them did live in villages, but they weren't really practicing agriculture in the way that we understand agriculture. Like Europeans, but not as advanced. Depends on how you mean when you say advanced. Taínos is a culture in Aztec. Yeah, there you go. So this would be like your Carib people, or your Nahuatl people, or your Texila people, or Texila people. Whereas you had big organized power bases like the Aztecs that had big capital cities and that kind of stuff. But yeah, you're there. You're there. You got it. So there we go. There were people down in Australia, and people had arrived in Australia somewhere around 40,000 years ago as part of a big migration group that came out of India. So we left. The particular group left Africa about 80,000 years ago and then made their way down the coastline here. They hung around India for a little while and then moved on down here. At that time, the sea levels were significantly lower because of the Ice Age, and a lot of this land right here was exposed. This was a big a big area called Sahil. And this is a big continent down here that was called Sunda. And you could have walked all the way down through this area. It would have been exposed. And you would have really only had to sail right across this area. So all of this shallow area right here would have likely have been exposed as well. And, you basically would have never had to leave sight of land to get over to this region. And once they got over there, and then they were there for a while after the end of the last ice age, around 11,500 years ago, you would have seen Australia become a more independent island, a smaller island. So there's a little bit of a migration lesson for you. I'm just full of random knowledge, right? All right, so one more group, and then we will call it a night. We need to talk about our Pew city-states. And then I'll just break that down to another line. Boom, there we go. Our Pew city-states. You feel like Shane believes in evolution. I do. I don't really have to believe in fact. It sort of just is, right? Here we go. Now, if you were with us in our last stream when we were talking about the organization of some of these early kingdoms, you'll remember the Pew city-states. Or if because I'm sure that everybody memorizes all of this material whenever I share it. But the region that we're talking about is mostly right around in here, especially in what is the modern-day country of Myanmar, and especially in these big river valleys sort of here in the central part of Myanmar. And I can show you a map. If I could get my windows organized. I don't know why my windows are really crazy tonight. But you can see here that we have a lot of these really big cities. And in this sort of oval that is marked here, we have our Pew city-states. And these were not necessarily a single group. What is most likely happening here is that each one of these little cities has its own either king or organizing council that runs it, but they are all very, very similar in physical culture. This is the stuff that they make, the stuff that they wear. They're speaking the same language, and they're ethnically very similar. So while they are separate individuals, this would be something very akin to the way that classical Greece was set up. So if you know, like Athens and Corinth and Sparta were all Greek that spoke Greek. But they didn't really get along all the time. That is a little bit similar to the way that our Pew city-states are set up during this period of time. And the largest one at the time is this most southern one right here, which is Shri Kshetra. Let me get back over here and I'll type that in for you. Notes. This is pronounced Shri, like Sri Lanka. And then you kind of make a click sound for the K, and then this S is an SH sound. So it's Ki Kshetra, and you kind of flick the R. And I'm not doing it 100% properly, but I'm doing it as close to an approximation as I can. And we are being visited by a puppy. Would you like to come see me? You all want to see the puppy? All right, let me turn the... Come here. Come here. Come and see me. Oh, yes, here's the puppy. It's a puppy. Oh my goodness. What are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, so many puppy sugars. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh, and you want to lick my hands? Oh, you want me to scratch your neck? Oh yes, I love this. Oh yeah, scratch my neck. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Oh, she loves getting her neck scratched. Oh, good gracious. Is that what you were after? Is that all that you wanted? It's a box. It's just a box. It's just a box. Do you want something? Do you want to go outside? Is that what you're after? You have to go see Brittany. I'm streaming. Oh my goodness. That dog. So she has this tendency where when she wants to go outside, she'll go find whichever one of us is furthest away from the door. It's like, which human can I most encumber by asking them to go outside? So she'll come back here and tell me that she wants to go outside, even though I know that Brittany is in the kitchen, which is right by the door to outside. So, oh yes, we have to share the puppy emote when the puppy shows up. So I'll share this. This has nothing to do with Shri Kshetra or the Pew City States, but we had to take her to the vet last week. I was rubbing on her side, kind of giving her some scratches, and I felt a lump that's like on her side right about here under her skin. And we took her into the vet, and she's going to have surgery on Monday. We don't know exactly what it is, but the doctor, the vet, wanted to go and get it and see what it is. So I'm sure that they're going to have to end up sending it off for a biopsy to see if it's cancer or not. So on Monday, if you want to send a little bit of a good vibe for the Kaylee Poo, she's going to have to be in surgery for probably a few hours to see what's going on with that. Not really sure what's going on. We're sort of hoping that it's just some weird thing, that they can just sort of pop off and that'll be the end of it. But, we're concerned. But I think she'll be okay. We've got a really good vet. And he is going to take as good of care of her as he can, right? So, but she'll be feeling pretty bad. She'll be feeling pretty bad for a week or so. So she might not be on stream for a bit. Anyway, so what's going on with Sheikh Chetra? Well, at the time, it's the biggest of the Pew City States, and this is mostly because it's the first one, right? So it's the southernmost one, and the way you got to these was by sailing up these big rivers in the southern part of Burma, Myanmar, whatever you want to call it. And it being situated right about here at the sort of head of this delta means that it is the first step into the rest of the Pew City States, which means that it has the most contact with the outside world, which means that it's the first step in any of them to get access to the trade goods, which means they're going to buy everything first, and then they're going to resell it to the city-states that are further upriver. And of course, that's going to bring them substantial amounts of wealth. And we know that during this period of time, they are almost completely converted over to Buddhism. And it won't be too much longer. By the time we get to the end of the next century, they're going to start building some really impressive Buddhist temples, some big stupas, really cool artwork and stuff is going to start coming out of this area. But for the moment, we don't know too terribly much about the actual governance of any of these city-states. We can hypothesize. Some of them are hypothesized to have been kind of an oligarchic rule where maybe several big trade families were ruling. Other ones like Sri Kshetra were almost certainly ruled by a single person. We don't know whether or not they called themselves a king or a mayor or a governor or what they really did, because we don't have a lot of written sources that come from their perspective. We have some stuff from India that talks about them, but the Indian terms that people inside of India use for governor and prince and things don't necessarily apply universally, and it's pretty common for India to call certain people that would have probably been a king not a king, because of the way that the cultural Indian ideology looked at kingship. So if you were the head of a city and you were a king, but you had an advisory council and India looked at you, they would have probably said, you're not a king because you have to listen to the advisory council. You're not like one person that has to do your thing. So there's a little bit of a cultural mismatch here, and that means that we can't always necessarily trust the Indian sources. I will say this, though. If we look at Indian sources from history and compare them to Chinese sources, the Indian sources tend to be less critical of people surrounding them. And what's really crazy, they tend to be much more harsh about their own people. Especially once we get to later periods of time where we have competing histories, where you'll have a Buddhist tradition history in India and you'll have a Hindu historical tradition, and they don't agree very much at all. And it can get pretty nasty between the sort of competing historical lines inside of India. But interesting stuff nonetheless, and really fascinating stuff to read if you are so interested. You can find most of that stuff in translation into English. But that is going to wrap it up for my part of the presentation tonight. But as always, if you all have any questions about any of this stuff, or if you want to redeem any channel points, or if you just want to ask a question about something random, I don't know why my nose is itching so bad. But anyway, now is the time. That is because foreigners don't know better, but Indians should. I guess that could be part of it. Maybe it's a little bit of a culturally superior air, perhaps, where you are more critical of yourself and more forgiving of foreign people because they just don't know because they're not from here. I don't know if I could say that for certain. I could see that in some sources, especially later sources that come out of India, because once you introduce the Muslim historical tradition into India, things just go out the window. Because, of course, you have these Muslim sources that treat external Muslim sources much better, but treat the Hindu and Buddhist historical sources within India like hot garbage. Because, of course, the sort of aversion to polytheistic religion that is built into the Muslim faith. You do not manage polytheism very well if you are a Muslim leader. It just doesn't sit. It sounds good as a meme. Yeah, I could see that as a meme. I could, like the little angry cricket fan, the guy that, sort of like stands there like this, and it's like, you should know better. Or is that too much stereotype? I don't know. I apologize if that was stereotype. Maybe I should have thought about it a little bit more before I said it. I try not to be stupid, but sometimes it happens without, my monkus. Yeah, monkus. Cricket. Well, there's like it's a meme, and it's like the angry fan, the guy standing in the bleachers or the stadium, and he's sort of got his hands on his hips, and he's like, and he's like all angry. It was taken at a cricket match. Ba-dum-bum-bum. Alrighty. Boop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doop-boo. So does anybody else have any questions or want to do any point redemptions or such? Otherwise, we might go do a raid. Who are we going to go raid? Bum-ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum-bum. What's in the news? Joey, do you have something specific you want me to talk about? Still don't have many points. Well, Tropical, you can always ask questions if you just want to. I'd be happy to just answer even random questions if you've got some. You're debating over what to force me to stream. Homozygote. So first off, it's spelled like this. Um, and if you want me to talk about what, are you asking me what a homozygote is? Because homozygote is something that has a matched pair of genes for any particular given trait. So if there's a dominant gene and a recessive gene, a homozygote has two dominant or two recessive. A heterozygote has a dominant and a recessive. So there you go. Let's see how this goes. Alleles. I think it doesn't it just work with genes too, or I mean, does it have to be alleles? I thought it could work for just a gene as well. You should not use finger guns to represent genes. Can we discuss the history of Oh. Okay, so what's in the news? What's in the news? Let's talk about what's in the news. Okay. Let me see. I didn't actually look at the news very much today. Today was a rough day. I'll just be honest. It was a really rough day. Oh, okay. Yeah. We could talk about what's going on in Sudan. So, about 2 years ago, the government of Sudan kicked out the guy that had been running Sudan since the 80s, a guy named Omar al-Bashir, who was a very conservative Islamist leader who had basically been propped up during the Cold War by people like the British and the Americans because we knew that he would never go communist. But when Bashir got pushed out, Sudan adopted a transitionary government. And the goal of this was to try to get Sudan to transition out of what was effectively a dictatorship into a democracy. And it hasn't gone so great. The Transitionary Council has fought with itself. There are a lot of different factions, and unfortunately, in like most cases of African sub-Saharan countries, well, the Sudan is sort of a Saharan country, so I don't even know if I can say sub-Saharan. A lot of African countries, the military has an incredibly large amount of political authority. And earlier this week, the military decided that it was going to push out the transitionary government and basically take over Sudan and enforce military rule. That has not gone over very well. There have been civilians that were protesting that have been killed. I don't know what the death toll is today, but I know it's up into the double digits. Many people have been wounded by things like, sort of shock grenades or flashbang grenades. People have been tear gassed. A lot of people have been arrested and probably won't ever see the light of day again. And as of yesterday, a lot of the sort of global institutions have started cutting them off. Like the World Bank said that it was going to freeze all of Sudan's aid, which is a pretty big deal because Sudan gets a substantial amount of its GDP from foreign aid. It's pretty messy in Sudan right now. Alleles are the names of the different forms of a gene. Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me, Nix. But I was right with the hetero and homozygote thing, right? Alleles are just different versions. Okay, so Brittany, by the way, I know this because my wife is big on this stuff, and I have adopted knowledge from her just by being around her and osmosing things. Nothing good has everything started with those words. I hear that there are a lot of teachers quitting this. Yes, teachers are quitting in the United States at a record high number. And a lot of this is because, I'll just be very blunt. People want to talk about how much America values teachers. America does not value teachers. America likes to think about the idea that they value teachers, and then when the rubber hits the road, is the teachers between the rubber and the road. I have taught in high schools, I've taught at a university, and I now teach at a community college. America does not care about teachers on any level. It just really doesn't. And if they did, they would fix it. What has happened since COVID has hit is that teachers have been forced into positions where they have basically had to adapt without any resources, without much support, and without really any way of knowing whether they're doing right or wrong until it gets to the end of the year and they get chewed out at their evaluation. Teaching in America right now is really friggin' hard. And if I could talk more about my personal life on stream and feel like I would get away with it, I would tell you some very specific instances. I don't feel like I should do that because it's not necessarily my place to air my own dirty laundry on Twitch like that, when I should be more responsible and take adult steps to resolve conflict. So I'll just sort of leave it at that. How much of these alleles are related to midichlorians? It's always fun to see other subject versions of biology. I try to learn everything that I can. I'll just be 100% absolutely honest. I enjoy learning. And if I can learn something, I'm going to try. Tries to find a good way to joke about Sudan. Watches everyone say nothing about it after Shane's news updates. It's pretty rough to joke about Sudan, right? Osmosis is explicitly just for H2O. Diffusion is for any other substance. Thanks, Moose. I appreciate that. Not being allowed to sit down was annoying. Yeah, well, it's a mess. It's also fair to say that in my state, it's illegal to strike if you're a teacher. They can arrest you. It's also illegal to have a teachers union in my state. So, yeah. Well, there you go. Yay! I feel like I just ranted there for a second. Let's go do a raid. I think it might be best for me to sort of extricate myself from this discussion before I put my foot in my mouth, and do something that I shouldn't. Who is around? Let's see who's up. And we can maybe go do a quick raid, and we'll skedaddle. Let's see who's around. Yay, Mississippi! Woo! Okay, we're going to go raid my friend Aristotle. We've raided him before, but it's been a little bit. I raided Aristotle completely on a whim. I was just looking for people that seemed to be educationally minded, that were streamers. I raided into Eris's channel, and let me tell you, easily one of the best blind raids that I've ever done. I have really struck up a friendship with this guy. We talk offline now. He's a philosophy professor, really great dude. I really enjoy his chats, and we're going to go give him a raid because I feel like he doesn't get enough love for what he does. Also, we can commiserate, because we fellow teachers and college instructors and stuff like that. It gets kind of crazy. But yeah, we're going to go raid Eris. All right, so my next definite scheduled stream is going to be Thursday next week, and we'll be talking about the Jin Dynasty of China. There is a possibility that next Tuesday we might have a special stream where I get in some history of Middle Earth, because I owe you all a history of Middle Earth stream. We have passed 600 followers. I've actually owed you that for a few weeks, so we need to get around to it. We might do that Tuesday, but it's really going to depend on how Kaylee's surgery goes on Monday. I don't want to promise anything, especially if she's in pretty bad shape and I have to, we have to do a lot of care, because my wife will basically have to take care of her all day, and then I'd have to take care of her in the afternoon to sort of give her a break. Anyway, I don't want to promise Tuesday, but maybe Tuesday we'll do History of Middle Earth. Otherwise, I will definitely see you all Thursday, maybe someday this week to do Gundam stuff. Or this weekend, who knows. Let's go raid Eris, our Battle Cries adventure. Throw some hats in that chat when you get there. I love you all. Thank you so much for making my day better, and I'll see you next time.